here we have the plans, and we're going to use a little bit of technology, as I said last time, to get the ribs here for the fuselage, and the technology is photocopying. I just photocopied this part of the plan, then I'm going to cut these out and stick them onto some balsa and a little plywood with spray adhesive. We're going to start with this part here, but you'll notice that the markings on this are not the same as for balsa wood. Here is some balsa wood, and we got some faint lines here showing the grain direction of the balsa, but in this case this is plywood, and it also says here ply, and these markings indicate how this part is supposed to be oriented on the plywood. Plywood does have grain, and this has to orient itself in a certain way. Now, plywood, here it says 3/16 inch plywood, that's around 5 millimeters, but 5 millimeters is not a very common thickness of plywood. We do, however, have 6 millimeter, and this beautiful piece of plywood, 6 millimeter thick, is birch plywood, and I urge you not to use any other plywood for things like this, the F1 or firewoods. This is the foremost rib in the fuselage. So we can see that the markings on the drawing show us how to orient this this piece. We can see the same lines on the plywood itself. So now we just cut this out and stick it to this piece of plywood. Before we stick this down onto the wood, I want to draw your attention to these lines here. There are 3 lines down there, and these are a bevel that's supposed to be cut, because the fuselage, as you can see here, is not straight. It sort of angles up here, and so we have to sand a bevel onto this. We'll do that after we've cut it out. Also, when we use spray adhesive like this, it's a good idea to spray it only on the piece of paper, not on the wood, and then let it dry a little bit before we stick it down. Before we cut these out, we have to notice that the lines go up and down in F2. That is, the grain of the balsa is up and down. But for F2A, F1A, and the instrument panel, the grain is 90 degrees. So we have to be very careful when we cut these out and glue them down onto the balsa. Also, here are some lines that show that the instrument panel has a bevel on the bottom and on the top. So we have to cut a bevel. We'll sand it actually with some sandpaper, top and bottom, because it inclines in front on top of the models. Now we're going to cut out these parts. I've already done one, and it's good to use a little steel ruler and our trusty hobby knife. We can use the ruler to cut along where the straight lines are, and then we cut out the part like this. Here we are. Now that we've done all the straight bits, we have to remove this bit here for the there's a longeron that comes along there, and then do the curvy bits. So it's best to begin just by putting your knife down as far as it will go, like this, and then cut the sides. No force required, by the way. Like that. Then we do the curvy bits, and again, no force. This first cut is really only through the paper. See? And then we can go the rest of the way in a few cuts. Like that. If we need to fix any of the form, we can do this with sandpaper and get the part down to the line, like that. Now we have part F1A. If we sprayed only the paper and let the glue gas off before we put it on the balsa wood, we should be able to pick it off like this with no gunk left on the piece. So the only thing now left to do is to transfer the number F1A to the piece, F1A, using a Sharpie. The only piece now left to cut out is this one. It's on the 6mm balsa, 6mm plywood, and we can begin by doing this. We can saw it out using this coping saw. Now, It's a matter of a few minutes to do that, but since I've got a bandsaw, I'm just going to use that one. Now, before we carry on, there are two lines that we need to transfer to our firewall that are not marked on it here on the plan. One is the thrust line of the motor here. It is not in the middle of the firewall here, so we have to measure it, and I measure from the top of the former down to the thrust line 3 centimeters, and I've put a red line down here on the firewall to show where it is. I used a square to strike it across. The other is just the middle of the firewall, and it's in the middle of this cutout, and again I used a square to mark it. Now, in order to get it onto the plywood so that it sits there after we've taken the paper off, we just mark these two lines with a knife. A little knife cut doesn't do any harm, and now we can take the paper off. Næst ætlum við að búa til hliðarnar í skrokkinn og jafnvel líma þær saman.